Okay, so today I will present on political algorithms, on instruments and actions. So one of the key starting claims of this paper is that algorithms are political. I will explain what follows, how to understand this claim. First, we have a purely technical and basic definition of algorithms. An algorithm is a sequence of instructions or set of rules that are followed to complete a task. This task can be anything so long as you can give clear instructions for it. So this is kind of the very basic and technical account of algorithms. Now, I will note, without going into a demonstration, that this technical account of algorithms is supported by two interrelated claims: the objectivity of algorithms, and second, the broader claim that technology is neutral. One could sum up this position as follows. The technical definition of algorithms, which presupposes their objectivity, is grounded in the larger claim of neutrality of technology. Now, after I indicated that the position which states that algorithms are political is a response to a problem, I still need to clarify in what respects are the algorithms political. So, to do so, I will discuss the views expressed in what is called in the literature on algorithms the black box. All right. For reasons of expedience, I will focus on two opposite views. Frank Pasquale's account on the black box and Boucher's account, opposing account on the black box. After I do so, I will articulate my contribution to this debate. So I will start from a statement made by former President Obama in a memorandum of the Freedom of Information Act. I quote, "A democracy requires accountability, and accountability requires transparency." Transparency and accountability are, in this case, political values and norms that are key in a sound democratic environment, which should shape our use of the algorithm. Second, let me quote a document published by the White House in 2016 titled Big Data Report on Algorithm Systems, Opportunity and Civil Rights. For those who are not directly involved in the technical development of algorithms for large-scale data systems, the end product of such a system can feel like a black box, an opaque machine that takes inputs, carries out some inscrutable process, and delivers unexplained outputs based on that process. I will not read the whole quotation, but I will read the last portion, which I think is relevant for us. At a minimum, such situation can be complex and difficult to address, especially if the outputs are relied upon again in subsequent determinations. At a minimum, it is important to encourage transparency, accountability, and due process mechanism wherever possible in the use of big data. Okay. Now, another key area that the authors of this memorandum, of this document indicated is that the problem of the black box is intensified by machine learning. And here we have this quotation right there. And essentially, it says that an additional area that presents challenges for further study is a genre of computer science known as machine learning, the science of getting computers to act without being explicitly programmed. Complex and often inscrutable even at times to their programmers, machine learning models are starting to be used in areas such as credit offers, entrepreneurial funding, or hiring. As these methods continue to advance, it may become more difficult to explain or account for decisions machines make through this process unless mechanisms are built into their designs to ensure accountability. And there, the authors point to the equal opportunity by design. So the argument that is being made here is that is not that algorithms are intrinsically political, but that they should be regulated by political norms. These democratic norms are accountability and transparency. I want now to present two opposing views on this problem of the black box. First, we have Pasquale's view in a book titled The Black Box Society, published by Harvard in 2015. And according to Pasquale, algorithm is political because decisions that used to be based on human reflection are now made automatically by encoded rules that are hidden within black boxes. Algorithmic decision-making is often described as impenetrable and secretive, concealed behind a veil of code and trade law. The point being is that algorithms are political because they are made to be opaque. In this context, transparency is a political norm which could allow for a sense of public accountability. Now, the opposing view is held by Taina Boucher in a book titled If Then, Algorithmic Power and Politics, Oxford 2018. And the question that she asks are the following. To what extent are algorithms usefully considered as black boxes? What could we possibly see if efforts to illuminate algorithms are not directed as the source code or details of its encoded instruction, but elsewhere? And what would this elsewhere be? I think our contribution can be understood through a displacement, a redefinition of the account of algorithm, in particular displacement of the algorithm understood strictly as an entity with fixed properties. To this account, she opposes the problem of the problem of when. That is the view that, one, the algorithm has emergent properties, and two, we should focus less on its technical constitution and more on what the algorithm does. Three, focus that is on the types of relations and experiences it engenders. And four, the effects, that is, the types of classification, orderings, and disordering that impact and shape the environments in which the algorithm operates. As I see it, according to Boucher, these 4 points qualify in a schematic fashion the algorithm as a political reality. I want to offer now my contribution to this discussion. I'd like to start from a comment that my friend Davide Panagia made recently on Boucher's book, related to Boucher's book. And quote, Taina Boucher in her recent book, If Then, Algorithmic Power and Politics, also raises the issue of how algorithmic structures, once they are embedded in everyday life and practice, don't simply help us complete mundane tasks more efficiently, but also produce, and crucially reproduce, everyday conditions of perceptibility and intelligibility, end quote. I find this comment very persuasive to clarify further the political existence of algorithms. My point has to do with this problem of production that Panagia hints at, and the problem of practice that Boucher identifies in her account of algorithms. We saw that the political question of algorithms is not reducible to the question, what is the algorithm made of? Which implies a sort of stable unity or a thing that has certain properties. Nor is the algorithm reducible to practices of concealing its true nature. Rather, the question is what kind of practices they engender and what outcomes the algorithm produces. The political question is not found in parsing the properties of the algorithm, but in the effects they have, in the experiences that they create, and the type of practices that they produce. In other words, the efficacy of algorithms lies not simply in its technical constitution, but in the types of classification, the ordering of or disordering that it entails. It is as long as the algorithms affects a change in the structure of our social, affective, personal, or collective arrangements that it has a political existence. I agree with the overall framing of this point. There is, however, one element that I want to draw your attention to. The point that is being lost here is the epistemic status of the algorithm. So is my claim. From Panagia's rendition and from Boucher's account of algorithms are political as long as they produce, as long as they are framed as instruments of production. This is not my view. In order for the algorithm to be an instrument of production, which shapes perception and intelligibility, I think one needs to clarify what makes the algorithm effectively political. I don't think this is primarily I don't think that it is primarily its productivity. The algorithm is for sure a useful instrument, not simply a decontextualized instrument, but before being useful and productive, the algorithm, I claim, is an instrument of action. The algorithm is an instrument of action that is a political instrument before being an instrument of production. Praxis, in Aristotle's terms, is thus prior and distinct from poiesis, to put it in both Aristotle's and Arendt's terms. I want to claim that what makes the algorithm political is not its productivity, the amount of labor that a corporation extracts from the body of these algorithmic instruments, but it is the actions that they take, the relational web that they institute in space and in time. My point is not that the algorithm is simply about praxis, however, though it clearly engenders new practices. It is about the algorithm as an instrument that is an organon of action or of praxis. It is as long as we describe the algorithm as an instrument of action and not as a strict instrument of production that I think that we can understand what it does. This distinction between instruments of action and instruments of production is not new. It is one of the features by which Aristotle describes natural slavery in his first book of Politics. I quote Aristotle: "A slave is an animate instrument of action, not an instrument of production. As an instrument of action, the slave is linked to the master in the same way a part is linked to the whole." End of quote. Mainly because of time constraints, I will not insist here on Aristotle's account of natural slavery. I will simply say that the Aristotelian concept of the natural slave as an instrument of action provides a powerful conceptual vocabulary, or rather a schema of intelligibility, to account for the contemporary algorithmic governmentality. Rather than the emergence of a new politic of life itself, my proposal consists in a formation of a contemporary algorithmic governmentality, a political physics of inorganic processes. The question is, what kind of political existence, what shape this political existence of algorithm takes? I already provide a part of the answer. The algorithms are tools of action, but nevertheless tools. If we take the classical definition of politics as the division between ruled and rulers, which is conducted by citizens via practice and logos, as Aristotle does, then politics is about deliberating and acting as ends. The algorithm would fall short of that description. The reason is that the algorithm develops and deploys within the sphere of means, not of ends. The algorithms put forward an economy of ends, an economy of means, not of ends. My account of algorithmic politics would need to explain then how a politics of means is even political. Let me illustrate my point in this way. All right. We have an instantiation of machine algorithm and bots. First, one short quotation which kind of indicates the origin of the word bot. The software engineers, I quote, computer scientists, hackers, and sophisticated technology users who automate communication on social or device networks often call their creation bots. The word bot is an abbreviation of robot, itself a 20th century Czech term meaning forced labor or slave. That is a fitting etymology for bots, in that they exist, in a manner of speaking, as digital versions of their embodied cousins. The majority of bots function as computationally enhanced conduits for human coders. They scrape the web for information, monitor chat sites for misuse, and crawl financial databases for market trends. But, end of quote. But what do the bots do? Clearly, the bots can be understood as an instrument of action. And here I have a quotation here, and I will try to conceptualize that. Bots, algorithmically driven computer programs designed to do specific tasks online, have invaded political conversation worldwide. And I'm going to spare you all the details of percentages here, but you have a sense that they're very active and pervasive. Many types. So one thing is sure is that many types of actor groups build, use, and deploy political bots. Corporate lobbyists, content management firms, civic activists, defense contractors, and political campaigns. I want to focus essentially on two things that algorithmic bots do. They monitor and they hunt. Surveillance and hunting are two ways of thinking about algorithms. By saying surveillance, I'm thinking of Foucault account of surveillance or society of surveillance. And by hunting, I'm thinking about Davide Panagia's work on algorithms and his claim that algorithms articulate a new power of hunting, which is epistemologically distinct from surveillance. I am not ready to claim, as Davide, that synergetic and surveillance are radically different regimes of power. However, I want to entertain the following thought. If we go back to Foucault and use his account of power in Discipline and Punish as a foil, we see that it is the sovereign power that could be more generatively linked to the power of hunting. It is the sovereign that is historically engaged in pillages and territorial predations, what Foucault calls prélèvement. This power is both linked to violence and spectacles, which individualizes it as such. But clearly, Panagia's account of algorithmic synergetics is not grounding in sovereign power, per se, though it engages with one of the key attributes of the sovereign. So my question is, how can we think synergetics as a new power of predation and hunting, located not in the violence which marks and tortures bodies, but in the incorporeal dynamics of algorithms? I think one answer is precisely to understand the algorithmic rationality as a politics of means, which has slavery as a specific type of power. I want to oppose here slavery, in particular slavery conceptualized by Aristotle, as a type of rationality to what Foucault, which is distinct from what Foucault calls sovereign power. In this framework, it is not the sovereign who exercises the historical power of hunting, rather, bots that are deployed and act as hunting slaves, that is, as slaves which are able to hunt. So let me conclude with an account of slavery of a specific power of minority. His famous response to the question, what is enlightenment? Kant makes a distinction between minor and major, between those who have the capacity to use their own reason and those who do not rely who do not. So some have the capacity to use their reason, and there are those who do not, and rely instead on an external authority. The formula that he's famous for is sapere aude, have the courage to use your own reason. To this Kantian call to use one's reason, I want to oppose Aristotle's account of natural slavery. And let me quote Aristotle in the first book of Politics. For he is by nature a slave, who is capable of belonging to another, and that is why he does so belong, and who participates in reason, so far as to apprehend it, but not to possess it. Hence, it is manifest that all the persons mentioned above have a moral virtue of their own, and that the temperance of a woman and that of a man are not the same, nor their courage and justice, as Socrates taught. But one is the courage of command, and the other that of subordination. A few remarks at this point. One, it is important here to note that Aristotle frames the problem of natural slave in terms of a capacity to belong to another. Second, he applies the problem of rule or being ruled in turn, which is the essence of politics, to the relation between the courage to command, which he opposes to the courage of subordination. The question is, why does it require courage to obey one's master? Third, the courage to obey one's reason is distinct epistemologically, morally, ontologically, and politically from the courage to obey a master. The courage to use one's reason is essentially the ability to self-legislate or capacity for autonomy. It is in fact a courage to obey one's own reason, which is distinct from the courage to obey a master. I claim that the courage to obey resides in the slave's capacity of being an instrument of action and not an instrument of production. To go back to my initial account, and with this I will conclude, just to go back to my account of political algorithms. Arguments for or against the black box unveil a problem, which is not only the problem of transparency and accountability, but also the problem of how algorithms shape our environments, the problem of what the algorithms do. As I showed, algorithms do not act as self-legislating agents, but as instruments of action. This poses the problem of redefining politics not from the perspective of the rational agents able to speak and to act, but to redefine politics in terms of a politics of means. This politics of means is not reducible to violence, as Arendt would claim, but is grounded in a new political rationality, of which the algorithmic governments is only one example. That is a rationality grounded in the powers of minority. Thank you. Maybe you can make it shorter because I think we're past. Okay. Are we on time?
There we go. Thank you. I'm not sure if I can form this into a question, but I wanted to go back to the point you were making about algos having a political existence,
yes.
David Panagia's point, and what that reminds me of, especially vis-a-vis things like Zuckerberg, is people have called this various things. Astra Taylor calls it foxtomation. Mary Gray calls it the last mile problem. Someone else has called it Potemkin AI. So this idea that algorithms will present a certain kind of facade, which is all about, again, objectivity, perfection, instrumentalization, and then you go beyond that and you start to find a lot of messy errors, of course, but also human labor, value extraction. And the world of bots, I think, exemplifies this kind of messy reality that we come across. And Twitter is, again, it's always this question of who am I talking to? Is it a bot? Is it a human? It's not even a binary. Sometimes it's in between one of those things, astroturfing. And I guess the question there is, to what extent is that double-facedness, to what extent is that accidental? To what extent is that strategic? To what extent is that emergent? Because it seems to me that often what we get is this almost purposeful promotion of a certain vision of this technology, whether bots or algorithms in general, that acts eventually as a way to justify and perpetuate the other aspect of that algorithm, which is really the money-making side of the business. So, you know, that's a way of saying if algorithms have this political existence and there are these different questions to be had about what they are called and how they are identified, what kind of centralized or emergent strategic thinking is driving some of these developments? I realize that's a fairly ambiguous question.
I think, no, it's actually, actually, thank you. So I like this question of strategy, the question of political strategy of bots. While you were speaking, I was thinking that one way that we could understand this phenomenon is through this notion of a strategic ambiguity. But still, these are pretty means towards ends operations. They seek gain, like you just mentioned. They seek some kind of they are transactional in nature. So I don't think we are in the realm of the non-strategy. We are very much in the realm of the strategic action. My intuition here, and is to go back to actually a point that Colin made, was this notion of consolidation. I think what the bots do is essentially help consolidate this economy of means. They help consolidate this economy of means in a fairly strategic way. They serve the purpose of being useful means. So that's how one way for me to think, to link this notion of strategic ambiguity to a notion of politics of means. But I'm still thinking through these questions, so it's very much the beginning of a process. Thank you.
Okay, I'll be quick. Thanks, Razvan. This is so thinking with Aristotle and Arendt on slavery, the exteriorization of thinking, of willing, the domain of means versus ends. There's a lot I'm sort of swimming around in my head here. But just sort of to think through the logic of the process of exteriorizing thought, the way that sort of this domain of means, and the question of some ends are being served. I'm just wondering what the ends are and whether we're pushing them under the carpet by just speaking of means, essentially, and whether these ends are commercial capture would be the intuitive, obvious one. But also Yuval Harari would say something just like unthinking satisfying of human preferences or something, but is the end falls away somehow in the unthinkingness, and there's the slavery entailed in this, and this is interesting, and I like this way of thinking through this. I just am wondering if we're not sort of tricking ourselves by talking about means rather than just identifying specific different ends. If you could say something for a moment about that.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah. So the way to think about this means ends question, it's to think to the question of the scarcity of ends and the proliferation of means. I think this is kind of one way to go about this. It's this dissymmetry between the wealth of our means and the scarcity of our political ends that I think all this discussion of instruments of action is operative. And it is, I think, reflective of a something very meaningful in this technological moment that we are in. Yeah, so I would just point to this dissymmetry between diversity and plurality of means versus what this I like this very much, this idea of a consolidation, and the scarcity of our political ends. And I think we should be in a position where we're able to replicate a certain plurality of ends rather than a scarcity of ends.
Any sense of what that would entail? Like just one example maybe of what do you mean?
I think I think this example of bots that I provided is a very good example of that, actually. They serve as means toward which are essentially transactional in nature, which are strategic in nature, but they are not immediately correlated to a political end. And that's I think a problem. Okay, I think we can. Thank you.